Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about the most recently issued GASB standard, the long-awaited GASB 103. Now, this has been a much-awaited, very long process to get to where we are today, which is on the financial reporting model. So the financial reporting model, if you remember, GASB 34 was a major change to how we present governmental financial statements, and the GASB took up a project to improve the financial reporting model. And for a while there, some of the items, the invitation to comment, the exposure drafts, even the preliminary reviews document, had some pretty large changes that were going to really impact governmental funds. And ultimately, last year, they decided to not continue down that path and to make this a much smaller project. And so it is a smaller project. While it is a update to the financial reporting model, you're going to notice it's not as big as what we were expecting from the original exposure documents. So let's take a look at GASB 103. It was approved in April of 2024. It didn't post to the website until May of 2024. And in terms of the goal here, again, it was to enhance the effectiveness of the financial reporting model as part of its update and to provide essential information for decision making and assessing governmental accountability. So, as I said earlier, just as important as what is not in there, or what is in is what is not in. And for the purposes of this standard, there are no changes to the governmental funds. So originally, the GASB had proposed that they were going to replace the current financial resource measurement focus, which is our current methodology for governmental funds, with the short-term financial resource measurement focus. They were renaming all of the different financial statements. They were providing a more principles-based approach to determining what would qualify for short-term presentation and what would qualify for being included in the short-term financial resource measurement focus. And so we were sort of expecting these very large changes, renaming things, having to train people how to do governmental fund accounting from scratch. However, at some point, the feedback was basically, it's just not worth all the costs, right? So while do you think that a more principles-based approach could be helpful? And currently the financial reporting for governmental funds in particular is very rules-based. Every time there's a new type of transaction, we write a rule for it. There's not an overarching principle that guides it. And so the goal was going to be to come up with this principles-based approach. But in doing so, they came across a lot of pushback in some of the major changes that were going to come. So first and foremost, not seeing changes to the governmental funds. However, they still did make several areas of change, as you can probably imagine here. And so the core areas of change are going to be the MD&A, unusual or infrequent transactions, the presentation of proprietary funds, major component unit presentation, and budgetary comparison. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what the impact of each of these is going to be. All right, so let's take a look at MD&A. MD&A probably one of the more interesting areas because we are going to continue to require that MD&A distinguish between the primary government and the discretely presented component units. However, they are going to require that the information presented be limited to the topics discussed in 5 sections: the overview of the financial statements, the financial summary, the detailed analyses, the significant capital assets and long-term financing activities, that is a name change, and then currently known facts, decisions, or conditions. And it stresses that these detailed analyses should explain why balances and results of operations are changing rather than just presenting the changes, right? So instead of just showing the amount that changes or the percent that change, but explaining why, right? So this is supposed to be an understanding. MD&A is really designed to help explain what's happening in the financial statements. And it does emphasize that the analysis that is being provided should not be unnecessary duplication, not repeating explanations as we go through there, and really avoiding what we consider to be boilerplate language. There are still people who use the example language in their financial statements today. And so really moving away from that boilerplate template to really be presenting what information is relevant and focus on that primary government to provide context to the financial statements that are going to follow it. On the side of the unusual or infrequent items, this is also going to provide this sort of change in presentation here. It describes unusual or infrequent items as transactions or other events that are either unusual in nature or infrequent in occurrence, right? So we get a little bit of a name change here from our extraordinary items and our special items. We just have unusual or infrequent. And they're going to have a display change. They're going to be required to display the inflows and outflows related to each unusual or infrequent item separately as the last presented flows of resources prior to the net change in resource flows in the government-wide, governmental fund, and proprietary fund statement of resource flows. So again, as we go through this, it's going to push them all down to the bottom so you can see them. And again, you're going to show them separately. On the proprietary fund statement presentation here, the statement of revenues, expenses, and change in fund net position continues to distinguish between operating and non-operating revenues and expenses. However, today, the entity, the organization, the government, gets to define what is operating versus non-operating. Now we are going to see a change here. It's going to require a subtotal for operating income or loss and non-capital subsidies be presented before the reporting of other non-operating revenues and expenses, so you get a location change. But then operating revenues and expenses are going to be defined. So operating revenues and expenses are defined as revenues and expenses other than non-operating revenues and expenses. And you're probably like, Melissa, that's not super helpful. So they chose to just go with a catch-all. Everything that's not non-operating is operating. And then they're very explicit about what is non-operating. So non-operating revenues and expenses are defined as subsidies received and provided, contributions to permanent and term endowments, revenues expenses related to financing, revenues from the disposal of capital assets and inventory, and investment income and expenses. They do put a little bit of a caveat in there depending on if it's your primary purpose of the organization. So for example, if you do low income housing, obviously then financing is going to be operating and not non-operating. But general rule of thumb, we define non-operating revenues and expenses. Everything else is going to be operating. They also provide a definition of subsidies, which is key to the definition of operating versus non-operating. So subsidies are defined as resources received from another party or fund for which the proprietary fund does not provide goods and services for the other party or fund, and that directly or indirectly keeps the proprietary fund's current or future fees and charges lower than they would be otherwise, right? So basically we're subsidizing the prices as a result of this. Or resources provided to another party or fund for which the other party or fund does not provide goods or services to the proprietary fund, and that are recoverable through the proprietary fund current or future pricing policies. And then all other transfers. So sort of three categories within that definition of subsidies. So obviously very important to the proprietary fund presentation there. In addition, we have our major component unit presentation here. It's going to require that each major component unit be presented separately in the reporting entity statement of net position and statement of activities if it does not reduce the readability, right? So the goal here is to show each major component unit. However, they recognize that if the readability of those statements would be reduced because it's too much, combining statements of major component units should be presented after the fund financial statement. So recognizing that if you have too many, you can do a combining statement. Another change, is related to budgetary comparison. Currently, you have a choice in the presentation of the budgetary comparison. It can be RSI or a financial statement. This is going to require that governments present budgetary comparison information using just a single method, RSI, required supplementary information. And they're going to be required to have two new variance analysis. Variances between original and final budget amounts are going to have to be presented as a column, and variances between final budget and actual amounts. And then in the notes to the RSI, you would have an explanation of any significant variances to explain those. Again, that would be in the notes to the RSI. So this is a pretty big standard, as you can probably imagine here. And so it does have a lot to it, even though it doesn't have those governmental funds. And so the effective date is going to be for fiscal years beginning after June 15th, 2025, giving us a little bit of a runway and all reporting periods thereafter. Earlier application is encouraged. And if you are going to early adopt, all component units should implement in the same year, subject to the provisions of paragraph 59 of Statement 14. All right, with that, that's a wrap on GASB 103. Again, a standard we've been waiting some time for. Lots of different. We had an invitation to comment, preliminary reviews, and an exposure draft previously to this. So we have been waiting for this, and now it's here. So hopefully you have a little bit of an update on what's going on in GASB 103. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future Nano Learning. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.